right, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the SenbridGe Satellite Holiday Edition. Can you believe that this is the end of 2020? I would say time flies when you're having that, well, you know. We have all heard, and I hope discovered, many silver linings this year. And since I believe that there can never be too many positives, I want to share a silver lining that particularly struck home with me. It comes from a list made by a social worker who works at care homes. And her name is Vanessa Holmes. Vanessa says, I'm inspired by my clients' resiliency. I work with one of the most challenging and highly stigmatized groups, and I learn from them every day, and these days more than ever. They are able to put these stressful times into perspective and rise above the challenges we are all facing, sometimes better than those without their challenges. And I want to say to you today that I feel exactly the same as Vanessa. I want to thank my SenbridGe friends and family and toast you for all of the work that you're continuing to do and for continuing to show the very best qualities of strength, leadership, patience, and compassion. I made a new friend this year, and I want to show you all a short clip, a video of him. I love this man. He reminds us that we must keep going. We will be noticed. We will make a difference. For our holiday edition today, we sent you all out a book, a very special book, a holiday gift, entitled The Future of Aging, which was co-written by our very special feature presenter today. Now, when it came time to send the book in the middle of the Christmas rush, when there was more traffic than we ever could have anticipated, there were some logistical challenges. But thanks to Yardi, our first ever SenbridGe Satellite sponsor, we were able to get these books over to you well in time for today's session, which hopefully you've read and we can talk about in a meaningful way. And I want to take a moment to say how grateful we are to Yardi, not just for today's session, but because in every year since SenbridGe began, and when we were called all different kinds of names, in every year over the past many decades, SenbridGe has been there to support us for each and every event. So thank you, Yardi, and thank you, Paul Alexa Jansen. And we have a little something special from Yardi at the close of the presentation today. But speaking of logistics, here's how we're going to roll today. So those of you who have attended SenbridGe Satellites, you will recognize this slide. We've got the chat feature circled on the left. You can use that to say hello to each other. I see many of you are already doing that. You're totally on top of this. Please also use it to interact with, to engage with Zayna. She really wants to participate with you and hear from you. She is dynamic in her presentation and wants to be of help. And wants to be able to progress a live discussion. So don't be shy to do that. And sorry, Q&A questions for the panel, we'll be keeping an eye on those. So submit questions for Zayna, not the panel. She's, as far as I know, still just one person. So we could submit the questions for Zayna in the Q&A feature over here. And if you have any questions, you can use the chat because the marvelous Lindsay Everett will be monitoring that. And we'll do our best to support you through the presentation. All right, so over to the main event. I cannot count the many SenbridGe events during which we have mused together about how great it would be to have the ability to read a crystal ball. Well, my friends, Today, SenbridGe brings you someone with exactly that superpower, Zayna Khayat. Zayna's title is Future Strategist. That's her actual title with St. Elizabeth Health. Now, Zayna has accumulated many accolades, and I really have to share a few of them with you because not only do her accomplishments astonish us, but they are emblematic. This is important, Zayna, because it's about you and it's also about everybody else. They are emblematic of the vast change that is occurring in our world, the vast change and the continuing advancement, I believe, that is impacting healthcare in particular. So I'm going to tell you that Zayna, from the years 2014 to 2017, was with Mars leading the Health System Innovation Platform. And then in 2017, Mars seconded her to the Reshape Health Innovation Center at Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands. Zayna is a faculty member at Singularity University, where she is in the exponential medicine stream. And if that isn't enough, she is also adjunct faculty with the Rotman School of Management here in Toronto in the health sector strategy stream. And so now, as to not take even one more second away from the main event, the real deal, I give you all Zayna Khayat.
Hello. Wow. I should take you with me everywhere I go. Great. Well, thank you for that. And just great to see people I know and some new faces. Let's have a conversation about the future of aging. Okay, so look, I'm going to really talk about the book. That's the point of this at a high level. I'm glad each of you have it because I think this will help contextualize and maybe focus where you start first. And then we'll end with a little bit of a reflection on COVID. I am going to stop, as was indicated, at a couple key points between some of the chapters. There's 5 chapters, and we'll just stop and see what you guys are saying, what you're asking, and then we'll keep going. And of course, I'm always on Twitter. I already tweeted twice during the introduction today. So all the handles are at the bottom of this page. Feel free to take a picture of a slide and share it with the world who can't be here right now. And you will get all of these slides afterwards. So, why did we write this book? Aging isn't a disease. It's not a thing to be fixed. It's, one of few really universal experiences, kind of like COVID right now. And it's got so much complexity around it because this universal experience transforms how we relate to so many things, ourselves, people around us, the services we get, the products we use, our built environment, our policies. And so kind of all of those are up for grabs. If the whole social construct of aging changes, then everything around it changes. And so the trigger point was really this inflection that most of us in the West are at now, as the boomer population is in their early 70s, that, at this point in time, there are more people in the world over the age of 65 than in the entire history of our species, of whoever made it to 65 accumulated, in the hundreds of thousands of years. So just kind of put another way, aging is on an exponential curve. So, that's reflected in both life extension. So while we might feel like, average life expectancy going up by 1 year over 3 years is like small, that's a game changer for humanity, because for 99% of the time we've been on this earth, the average life expectancy was about 18 years old. Nothing was designed for a body to stay alive this long, and none of our kind of social constructs. And then, of course, global population is also on an exponential curve, not only because of life extension, but, all the other things we all know. So that's why we wrote the book, is we really thought, our entry point to understanding aging and all its intricacies is as a healthcare organization, and I'll explain that in a bit. But there's no way we can continue to deliver on mission if we don't understand the whole thing, because it won't work anymore to be a point solution provider to one piece of an aging person's life. And so we wanted to bring a new way to discuss the conversation so that we can consciously design for that future and influence how others design for that future. So just quickly on SE Health, we're a purpose-driven organization. We wake up every day with one KPI, which is to spread hope and happiness. And we're structured as a social enterprise, which means, we do a lot of different activities and services and products. And any proceeds that we generate, we reinvest into problems in society that we think are really important to support our mission around First Nations health, around homelessness, et cetera. Our core, our entry point 112 years ago was for midwives, inspired by Saint Elizabeth from Hungary, to do care in Toronto. That's now some 9,000 professionals doing some 20,000 care exchanges in people's homes across Canada. From that, as we start to understand people's lives, we've diversified. And so other units, if you will, we run career colleges to train health workers. On the bottom right, we have a whole separate platform called Eliz, which has a customer called the family caregiver. So all products and services, not for older clients, but for their families. And then a big growing area has been getting people out of hospital and getting them home. And that's absolutely exploded with COVID. So we have a whole transitions team to kind of decentralize care into the home. And probably the more growing area that we've really been investing and responding to demand from people like all of you has been in seniors living. And that's where I think we're in maybe 15 or so facilities across Canada where we'll do anything from, the care in the building, but more and more we're co-designing the facilities, co-designing the services, taking over the operations. And now with my team, the Futures team, we're actually building a new market and a new business model ourselves, which I'll talk about. So just a little bit of background on SE Health. Okay, and so I did not write the book. It was a whole team effort. It took about a year of research, data collection, looking at something like 400 signals of interesting, peculiar patterns and trends all over the world, and then combining them. So it really was my CEO and a whole team at SE Health and our partners at the design firm Idea Couture. So when we looked at all those 400 signals, we kind of didn't have a point of view of what topics we would emerge. We just kind of let the data show us. And they kind of clustered into these 5 themes. And that's how the book's organized, is 5 chapters. Of course, they're interdependent, but they just take a different lens on big shifts in how aging is nothing like it ever was before, which means most of the products, services, and policies we have from the past are not going to serve. And that's kind of the impetus for reshaping our own work, but influencing others like you to kind of reinvent yourself for the future. So chapter 1's about everything about community, living, built environment, housing. That's your space. Chapter 2 is about healthcare. Chapter 3 is about tech. Chapter 4 is about the economy of aging, spending and working and labor force participation and saving and all that. And then chapter 5 ties it all together, which is just the shift in the whole identity of aging. I'm actually going to talk first about chapter 5. I wish we would have redid the book a different way to kind of set the frame for this. And then I'll go through each chapter. I'm going to spend the most time, obviously, on chapter 1. And I'll just kind of do a little helicopter ride through the others just to give you a flavor. And like I said, throw some questions and we'll stop and have a little chat every now and then. Okay, so, a big part of this shift in the identity of aging is just a whole reframe of many aspects of visuals, language we use, because, there's different identities emerging, much like that video we just saw of a 100-plus-year-old gentleman, still racing. So each chapter is organized around what came out as 4 major shifts. They kind of give a structure to the conversation. And in this chapter around the identity, the big shifts are first and foremost a whole mindset shift of the activity and the attitude being around reflecting on the past and some late life crisis, like a bad fall or the death of a spouse or whatever, triggering a whole bunch of reactive action, to a much more intentional reinvention and recreation of oneself. From the goal being of aging to accumulate all this knowledge and wisdom and just accumulate it, put it in the bank and thank you very much, to really the value being generated for society from this wise leader, much like the elder in kind of a First Nations community, and that being a massively valued asset. And again, intention around harnessing and embracing that shift. We did a lot of exploration because the data took us there around sexuality and gender identity. Wow, is this unfinished business for the older population? There's a whole shift from conforming to this authentic enactment of one's gender and sexuality. And I think there's an explosion of products, services, and policies waiting to happen to meet where that market is going. And then we did a big look at just all concepts around life-limiting illness, end of life, death, dying, memorialization, and it's just going to be nothing like what it was, massive agency over one's end of life. And so, just to give some examples of like little signals. So this was a commercial that was that caught my attention. Let's have a look about reimagine, the aging.
Hi, would you like to try the world's first aging cream?
I'm not interested in that.
It will actually make you look older.
Why would I want to look older?
Don't you want to look older?
No.
It will help you in the workplace to feel more confident.
Don't worry
Be more
about
reliable.
confidence. I am confident.
It'll help you with pre-presentation panic.
Okay. Then starting towards maybe a little bit more interested.
Do you want to try it?
Maybe I'll try
Do you want
it
to try
because
it?
I'm
Yeah?
young, but
What do you think?
I don't feel any different.
Can I let you in on a little bit of a secret? Image, our aging cream, doesn't actually exist, but ageism towards older workers does. Did you know that 41% of older adult Canadians report feeling ignored? That's ageism. Unmask the whole story at torontooverall.ca/ageism.
Okay, so you can just start to see right at the beginning, just from positioning, people are like, no, why would I want to look old? And there's this whole body language, and you can see how quickly it shifts just from positioning. And that's really the message of this, is that shift will be normal. And, to me, the parallel to this is much like, even though there's tons of work to be done, but much like sexism and racism kind of had a peak movement that kind of got us out of an old paradigm, and we're still on a journey. I think we're going to get to that peak right now with ageism, and that's what this chapter is about. So some signals, right? Words. I've been collecting these framing that different organizations are using that just are very different language from, silver tsunami and gray and all this other kind of deficit tone of aging. Some countries have, their own lexicon and own words in their dictionary to describe a very different type of older adult. So in Finland, the tervaskantos, the healthy and vibrant elderly person, and actually Canada was one of the first to bring a new word to the lexicon, this concept of a boomer, right? The zoomer, the boomer with zip. To just start to reframe, the expectation as people age. Other examples of this, I was in Boston before the pandemic. This was in the airport. All the billboards was a big campaign, much like the city of Toronto's trying to do, and others. I know Vancouver's all over this, around age strong. That's their tagline. And to really position and show, everyone's interpretation of what age strong means to them. Right. And imagine blitzing your market with that. Other signals, this guy, Rattlebond, when I was in the Netherlands, he was kind of like the Anthony Robbins of the Netherlands, but a little bit older. So kind of quite a personality. And, he was single and he was trying to get on Tinder and get some dates. And he couldn't, because as soon as people saw his age, it was like a no-go. And so he went through a process to legally change his age. Because he said, I can change my gender, I can change my name. Why can't I decide my age? Because we've arbitrarily set these dates like turning 65 or 21 or 16, that everyone is one kind of segment of one in terms of what they can or cannot do or get access to. And it's just kind of starting to trigger a very different conversation about this fluidity of age. Other kind of signals, this is, you guys know the dance troupe at the halftime show, usually it's like fairly young people with very little clothes on. Well, the Wisdom dance troupe of the Wizards, the Washington Wizards in the NBA, the youngest age to be in the dance troupe is 50, and they get just as much floor time as the more traditional dance troupe. We've done quite a bit of work with this company out of Norway that is basically, taking away barriers to get help older adults ride a bike, but that are stationary through recreating videos that they kind of drive through the town that they grew up in at an appropriate speed. So this is considered reminiscence therapy in many ways. And, they just kind of took their idea to a whole new level and started like an international road race. I think they can, in one road race where people, Canada competes with Norway, competes with the UK, connecting senior living centers across the country. I think they circumvent the globe like multiple times in one race. And they're approximating becoming the biggest sports event in the world. So you can just see how much you can democratize access to things, and nobody's questioning this. Other signals, gamers. You think about when video games came out. Today's older population, they were the first to use video games, and they are really good at this from a dexterity, reactiveness, being able to process a lot of information at the same time. And they have a lot of time on their hands. They train really hard. They show up at the competitions and they spank everybody else. And there's just a whole movement around these older gamers. Sports leagues. So we saw the Japan example earlier. There's a lot in Japan. As you know, they've already reached the threshold of older adults that, today that we're going to get to by about 2035, something like 20% of the population. But this is a minimum 40-year-old competitive full contact rugby league. And, you interview some of the players that, are breaking bones, and, their frame of mind is, if I die playing rugby, perfect. So just a different whole market here. A pop band made of 100-year-old plus only, and look how big it is. Stories we hear from nursing homes around, tea party raves. And this is a great story in Germany of a metal band that was giving a concert in Germany, and some gentleman basically busted out of the nursing home to go to the mosh pit of the band. And many other things. Grandma influencers. I think there's been a renaissance of Estee Lauder and Revlon and all these beauty brands now realize there's a whole market they have not talked to and created products and services for. Photography is being reinvented. And then finally, I think I think sexuality and all aspects of that will be a whole market that has not been created. Just end of life constructs around planning for death, around cremation, around eco impacts, memorializing, and then a whole afterlife memorialization and the role of tech is just a real growing area. And COVID has obviously accelerated that. In the past month alone, my company formed a partnership with 2 startups, Willful, which really is a digital, beautiful experience and cheap for making a will, and Irene, which is like Uber for cremation services, like a nice, simple, easy, low cost experience that looks nothing like going to an old stodgy funeral home. So that's kind of chapter 1. So maybe I'll stop there and just see any comments, reflections, reactions before we get into housing.
Zayna, we do have a question in the Q&A board that is from one of our attendees. It says, did you get input from seniors as you were writing the book?
Yeah, all the way through. Because Idea Couture is a design firm, so they, their core methodology is human-centered. We have a pool of older adults and family caregivers. We call them our wiser advisors. That is our go-to for co-design, feedback. They're kind of our test lab. So we're back and forth with them on everything. And when we launched the book, it was our wiser advisors who launched it, not St. Liz authors. So yeah, that's kind of core to our methodology. Okay, so let's get into a bit of community and housing. That was chapter 1. So, the 4 big shifts that summarize this book, I'd say the first one is around, let's call it hardware or the physical built environment. And then the last 3 are more software, which is everything around that. And this is all fundamental to this industry. So obviously the massive shift as people have agency, choice, and are directing every aspect of aging is them not accepting one size fits all predefined constructs that are set by an industry or by government, to really creating, their form of whatever community is. And that's not just obviously the house you live in. And then once you've got that, we see shifts around really formalizing all the support around people as they age. And there's this whole formal caregiving economy emerging. And I'll give an example. And there's going to be a big launch this fall from a major Canadian company in this space that we're part of. A shift. And again, COVID really accelerated this from, relationships being very local and being very analog. And that's kind of not enough, to much more meaningful connections that can be done virtually, but they're meaningful and they're good and they're rich. And then just, this shift from being accepting isolation and being alone to intergenerational and all these other really multi-faceted living arrangements. And again, housing and living models that are built for that, right? Multi-generational housing is the highest growing subsector of housing in North America, yet nothing is really built that way. We're still building for heterosexual couples in a single detached home. So just some examples to highlight this, this idea of the formal caregiving economy. We've been keeping our eye on PAPA in the US, which is really matching usually students who have time and want to learn with older adults who need some help. And there's, a currency exchange as well. They did a major fundraising round. I think it was a Series B, if I remember, in the middle of COVID. So massive growth there. On, of course, housing. If you look, this is kind of by age, the different trajectory of needs of housing and the patterns. And, this is the massive market where either there's too much house or the house that one has doesn't meet their needs, physical, functional, social, psychosocial, whatever it is. And really the options here are so limited. It's either you go, if you're very wealthy, you can buy what you need. And that's a very small portion of older adults. If you're way, way, way below income, there's public safety net resources. They're not great, but at least they're there. That whole missing middle, we estimate is about 67% of the elderly market. There really are not options and stock that meet what they want. And, you add on top of that, let alone housing, if people need care, especially given we're going to be staying alive so much longer and accumulating disease risk, pick a study. The one that the conference board did a couple years ago estimates that if we keep doing things the way we are, with like a warehousing model for older adults in nursing homes, we'll need basically take all the capacity we have today and add 50%, and that's just not going to happen. And this is a conversation all over the world. And so really the shift here is emancipating from a warehousing framework that, when people are no longer useful, society's old definition of useful, which means, you're not working anymore. The old model, as you know, was alms homes. That's where people went if they didn't have money to kind of live out the rest of their life. Now they're just a new word called nursing homes. And then it's funeral homes, and kind of none of these is what anyone wants. And they're actually not necessary at the scale they are today. Absolutely, they make sense for some people, but this should not be the default option. And so in our work where, we work with nursing homes, we work with hospitals who, are obsessed about, we don't have beds, we don't have beds, we don't have beds. And they just ask for more money for more beds. We're like, we see beds everywhere because we're in people's homes every day. The acuity of care that we now give in people's homes is higher than the acuity when hospitals and nursing homes were built in the first place. So the kind of ability to recreate the nursing home at home and the hospital at home is very possible. It's already happening all over the world. It is just not the dominant mind frame yet here in Canada. And that's a big part of what our team works on. So interesting signals is health delivery organizations. So traditional hospitals, home care, nursing homes, big health systems like Kaiser Permanente are now really getting seriously into the housing market, independent housing as well as supported. Either that's for a certain population like seniors or affordable or what have you, but lots going on. It's slam dunk economics. It's what people want. And for particularly US, but also Canadian health delivery organizations who have a business model that they have no control over, it's a massive diversification play of a business model. And I will add faith-based organizations are on the same journey. So that could be Catholic-based health organizations like mine, but also churches, monasteries, convents, where they have a lot of land and their goal is mission. And, the job they did before, which was to bring healthcare because nobody would take care of poor people. There's a lot of other people doing that now. So what's their next thing? And the big focus across Canada has been housing with healthcare built in. So that's kind of where we're at. We've taken all this and we've gotten really serious about pivoting into housing with healthcare. We got a pretty sizable grant. The Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corp has a lot of money and a big national strategy around housing for seniors that's affordable. And so us, Covenant, our partners in Alberta, and the Catholic Health Alliance, which represents 124 health delivery organizations, mostly hospitals, who have a Catholic or a mission orientation. We're really forming a way to, we will build our own housing, but we're actually going to take away the barriers from letting everyone get into housing for seniors. And we're working with overlap. So we're calling it Building with Mission. And that just started. And the lead of this for St. Eliz is actually the former head of health from Google Sidewalk Labs, who we recruited onto our team, Alexis Wise. So just, for our project, our big idea is how can we build a housing experience that people will move in because they want to and stay in because they can. And that's where the affordable and attainable. And, the business model we're starting to lean towards is really housing as a service. It's kind of like how Elon Musk got into the car industry, not by being a car manufacturer. It's basically an iPad on wheels. That's kind of the concept of it's not about the physical infrastructure. It's about what it can do to meet your goals. So just the last couple signals about housing, so much is going on in this space around the world, both just housing for seniors, but also housing plus healthcare built in. So we've been collecting that and informing our own designs for, our first build from that. And just a couple examples that give us inspiration, these using policy as an instrument to innovate, to allow new models, laneway housing. There's a big development in Calgary with this, a lot obviously in Toronto, all over San Francisco, new zoning, just changing our policies to open up channels for new housing stock and new models that meet people where their needs are. Another example of policy interventions and other innovation is just intergenerational. So both services and amenities. So there's all these new matching kind of Uber-like services of older adults who have too much house, millennials who need house, and how do you match them without a lot of friction? And then linked to that is just policy innovation that catches up with the times. So we all might remember the Golden Girls, and it was just such a unique thing for 4 women to live together and own an apartment. Well, most of our housing policy is not designed for people who are not married or family to own something together. And that's going to really get in the way of housing stock. And so a private members bill, for example, in Ontario was pushed through last year called the Golden Girls Act, which is just tweak the language of what counts in the Planning Act for people who are unrelated being able to co-own housing together. So that's kind of the summary of this one. There's lots more in the book, but I just wanted to highlight a few things that get us excited and really hopefully trigger, maybe for many of you, validate, the pivots you've made and maybe trigger and inspire you to push a little bit further. I'll stop before I wrap up the last few chapters and just check in on the questions.
Zayna, I've received a couple of questions here just on my text. The next one is also about your research. The question is, from your research for this book and your time with SE Health, Were you surprised by any of the myths and misconceptions that you discovered yourself in your later stages of the research?
So look, I work in the future. I get to see a lot of really cool stuff. If you follow my Twitter feed, you'll see what I mean. And I still had brain guts all over the place, as we do that. That's a metaphor for my mind being blown. Yeah, there's lots. There's a lot of really, they get you if you read some of the people we interviewed and some of the examples and some of the quotes. And like, it's kind of stuff you knew, but when you hear it, you're like, oh, that's what that is. And I tell you, my way of thinking changes every time I read the book. And I kind of have to refresh all the time. So I think some of the end of life stuff really blew my mind. So there's this new word called necrotechnology. Like, what? It's a whole area. Some of the stuff around labor force and the economy. So you'll see what I mean. So yeah, the answer, like long answer, yes, my mind got blown a lot. Anything else?
Yeah, just one more. It's about cultures. It was framed as countries or nations, but I think it's about cultures in kind of like a pan-global view. I know that you've done work, outside of Canada, outside of North America.
Yeah.
Do you think there's somebody out there, some group, some culture that, just by reason of their own traditions and history, is doing this better, and who we can look to as role models?
Absolutely. It's an excellent discussion point. So one, the audience for this, because like we wanted to keep it broad, but not really international, is I'd say the West. So Europe, North America is our primary audience. That's who we work with and who Idea Couture works with. And that's because South America, a lot of Asia, Africa, like they already do a lot of this. Like they didn't, it's just like what we have with, healthcare here, where we built stuff that we now need to dismantle. They never built it in the first place for whatever reason. We lean on in our insights, our First Nations and Indigenous, some of their thinking around elders. And of course, Japan is probably the gold standard because they're already dealing with what we're going to be at in about 15 years. So things we look at Japan and we think it's so taboo that there's a robot giving your grandma a bath. That's just normal for them. And then, of course, a lot of Scandinavian countries who they haven't decided to medicalize aging as much as we have. So they're already doing things that are leapfrogging what we need to first undo before we can get there. Yeah. And Africa. You'll see lots of examples from other countries.
We have a few questions. We're going to throw one or two more at you.
Maybe one more, and then we'll finish at the end. I just want to show you guys a couple other things that'll, again, brain guts.
All right. So there's another one that's sort of global. Let's look at this one. Did you look at seniors living with cognitive challenges?
Yes. We didn't focus deeply on it, but absolutely, you can't avoid it. The way each book is structured, if you read it, we start with a persona based on a real person, their whole life story. So we paint that picture. And then we go through the shifts. And at the end, we rewrite the persona as if those shifts happened. And I believe, I don't know if it's for senior living, but one of them is a person with cognitive decline. So we really had to unpack everything about their life. And just so you guys know, for the work you do, those 5 personas we built, like those were hundreds of hours of work before and after. When we do workshops on the Future of Aging book with policymakers, with practitioners, whoever, we use one of the 5 personas to anchor our design of new things. So they could be very powerful and useful for you because they're based on a lot of research. Yeah. Any other burning question?
I think, why don't you proceed and then we can circle back maybe one more time.
Okay. And of course I can chat in the chat after, and I'm going to have my email address. Anyone can contact me anytime. That's why we're doing this. Okay, just quickly a bit on healthcare. Of course, there's a conference every day about healthcare and seniors. So I'm just going to do a couple highlights. I think one is that we picked up is just challenging language. Language is mindset. The words you use affect your brain and influence a lot. So, we fully expect the word seniors will be eliminated from language and lexicon. And so there's, that's got implications. Even we cringe every time we show senior living on our own slide. And there's not an agreement of what people do or don't like, but seniors does not resonate for most. Even the word care is being challenged because it holds so much history of something being done to you or for you, and the power is still sitting with the provider. And that is an old power construct, and much more around the role of any formal provider being an enabler, a coacher, a trainer, etc. So just some kind of interesting signals there. I've got 100 of these words. These are just 5. I'm happy to share them a different time. The biggest shift of healthcare, the universal shift, is a reframe of the goal of healthcare no longer being about keeping you alive as long as possible at all costs, eliminating disease, curing, reversing, and we've done a pretty freaking good job of that anyway. So remember I said for almost all the time we've been on the earth, what would happen is you were very, very healthy because you were, your circadian clock was right. You're exercising all day because you're hunting from food or running away from being hunted. You ate extremely lean. But then, you run into a tiger or you step on a tree bark and then you die. Like it was a very quick death, and it happened very early from famine or whatever. Wow, as a society, look what we've done. We've, tripled, quadrupled lifespan. Some analysts like Yoel Hariri and others believe that we are now at a point where a child born today might live to about 115, 120. And some others believe that this life extension, so the x-axis it's infinite. We're in immortality, and they call this longevity escape velocity. So the concept of escape velocity, right, is you get to a point when the rocket is at a point above the Earth that the power of gravity can't pull it down anymore. It's gone. Well, if gravity was, what aging does to end life, that, some predict that for every year you and I are now alive, science and, good sanitation and vaccines can keep us alive for 1.1 years. So anyway, the horizontal will go, but what we will not accept is that long, declining curve of health span, which is very different from how our ancestors lived. And so sure, there'll be life extension. That doesn't really excite us. We don't really talk about that in the book because that's just going to happen. That's science, that's civilization's progress. The key to the game now and the role of healthcare is to match your health span to your lifespan. How does that curve stay very, very high and then, a pretty rapid decline when things are life limiting? So for our own organization, we've been in a whole journey to reinvent what do we call good healthcare in this context. And our new frame, and we're still working on it, is really we look at healthcare along the life course where, there's these different stages from healthy and active to the life limiting stage. And of course, you can go back and forth. And you can't have a one size fits all healthcare delivery model because that really means one size fits nobody. There is no segment of one in aging. There's segments of millions. And, the traditional way healthcare was determined in terms of what services you get and who does it and where was a couple pretty blunt inputs, a bit of your demographics, age, gender, and then a bit of your medical stuff, your blood work and whatever, your history, your physical determinants of health and your physical determinants of kind of accumulated disease risk. Well, that's not going to cut it, so we've added now, and this is the call that healthcare is trying to evolve to, of all these other contexts, your preferences. What can you do? What can't you do? What experience do you have? What relationships do you have? What support do you have? What's your social context? This is just going to become the normal way we design health services, and that's what we're building towards. And then you add on top of that, then you kind of have to be in 3 operating systems when you're delivering care in terms of your approach. You need to design services where you're kind of driving more, so a needs-based approach. So in purple is like where the provider is probably doing more of the activity or setting more. But again, whether you're at the far end of the spectrum or the beginning, the band is still purple all the way across. There will always be people who, want to outsource a lot of their care to experts and professionals for whatever reason. And you have to be ready for that, but not only when they're sick, On the other hand, on the far left is a more preferences-based approach where you're calling the shots, you're directing, you're not really relying on a lot of people. But again, you might still want that at the far right. So you have to be able to juggle between. And in the middle is this weird dance of a strength-based approach where as a provider, you're really attuned with what assets people have, what they don't, and how do you adjust what you're doing. This is the future of healthcare and aging. And wow, are we so far from that in how we do things. The other big lens, of course, this is my world, is that home is where health will be created, maintained, and restored. And when we say home, we mean whatever home is. That could be your nursing home or your dwelling or whatever, but really relocating the locus of health to be the home. This is the only modeling I've done in my career. And this is what analysts predict, that the home setting will be synonymous with healthcare. It won't be an H symbol when you think of healthcare or a plus sign or a doctor with a stethoscope, right? Those are going to be agents in the process, but not the dominant. It will be home. And obviously that's exactly what's happening now with COVID. And then just the last little example of just things that get us excited. And somebody mentioned dementia. This is a group in the States that developed these like day programs, kind of like a daycare for where you could, somebody could come for the day while their informal caregiver might have to work or needs some break. But wow, did they challenge every assumption of what a memory care center. So first, business model, go to all the empty strip malls, and there's going to be a lot more empty strip malls kind of coming out of what's going on. And really, they built the physical environment around this reminiscence therapy where the formative stages of one's memory were, for this population in the 60s. So it's like a Happy Days, scene. And then the other business model innovation is on the price. They've kept it to about $95 a day, no matter what. And that's because this is a nonprofit that's driving this. And they're now kind of scaling. I'm still waiting to see who in Canada buys the franchise rights for bringing this to Canada. So that was healthcare. A bit on tech. A big thing we do is just some myth busting around older adults and technology. This is old data already, 2017. Pew has done probably the best research around, social media, around internet, around ability to use devices. This is already way out of date. I've given up trying to update since COVID because there's a new research study every day on kind of this massively accelerated rate of technology adoption. The fastest driver of adoption of voice technology is the older adult population. It's the easiest interface. And voice will be the dominant interface for all of us with our technologies. We're going to look back at how we, touched iPads and think that was like a typewriter. The big thing about what technology does, other than life extension technologies, like I talked about, we don't really go into that in the book. That's a given. The big thing is recreating world experiences that today are inaccessible or were previously inaccessible. And the way to do that is not some net new device that's just for the elderly that needs its own charging system and its own software. And it's just existing tools that are pretty common, like the Wii or Xbox or whatever. So just some examples, here's a gentleman who just using the Wii board can go through a forest, catch rabbits, get points, and really gamify and use physical action, hands, feet, and pointing. So there's a lot going on there. This is the biggest bowling league in the world. That's all just done on a Wii. You sit in your living room, and this connects a community socially. In this case, right now across the U.S., it's been going, I think, for 13 years. Other big tech things, again, recreating inaccessible experiences, is this whole augmentation role of tech. So augmenting the body as it labors. I think wheelchairs will be a thing of the past. Clothing, a lot of things that were designed for either the elite sports market or military or space, then being applied to similar body needs of older adults. So, the clothing that pushes you up and it gives you strength in your legs or your arms or whatever. And then I think transportation and mobility more broadly, is going to go through a renaissance. And China, I think, just announced a version of this, but Voyage in the US, exclusively in senior living communities, these self-driving cars, no taxis, no buses, no cars. They just drive everybody around in these like juiced up Chrysler Pacificas. So I think all these aspects of movement are not going to be so limiting with the tech that's coming. And then of course, extending what humans can do, either because humans can't be around 24/7, people don't want them 24/7, and actually there's a lot of things us humans do that get in the way of good experience for older adults. So digital companions, whether that's voice, conversational type chatbots, and then robot type companions that add a humanoid or an animal piece to it, doing all range of things. And again, these seem kind of bizarre in North America. These are pretty standard. What's going to happen with the technology is going to get easier, cheaper, simpler, and just much more intuitive. I mean, that Pepper robot, everybody fawns over, like that's pretty clunky. They're going to get small, fast, and they're going to be they're going to pass why I call my Zayna credit card sniff test. Can you buy it for about, an average consumer electronics price of $2,000? Today, they're like $70,000, but that's going to go fast. So that's a bit on tech. And let's just kind of end with a bit on money. So this whole reframe of, that something magically happens at age 65 that you can no longer participate in the workforce. Like, obviously that's done. So, from retirement to rewirement, and think about the gap of skills, particularly in computers and trade skills. And here's this massive population that's going to be alive till 100, 110, 120. And so just a whole reallocation of skill set. There's a great group here out of Canada, if you haven't seen them, called The Future of Worth. They've trademarked it. Their umbrella org is What's Next. And it's really a community to create a whole set of pathways for what purpose do you want to live when you're done kind of informal day, 9-to-5 labor participation. And this is an international community, but it's kind of started out of Canada. So I'm a big fan. And then just last couple of things about labor and the economy is these brands are all piling on to the aging market. Procter & Gamble, you know them for Tide. It takes a lot for P&G to create a new brand category. They did for aging. So I think they have 5 subcategories that they're now doubling down on, like incontinence, skin, and a couple of the logos on this page. We're now working on bringing some pretty interesting products to market next year. If you want the best summary of this, read this book. I can't do it justice in one slide. And then finally, I was going to show a video, but I'm going to skip it so we can get to discussion. Family caregivers is a whole new customer market that has yet to be tapped. That's why we launched our Liz platform, and we're just building and building on it. But designing products, services, experience. I mean, for all of you in senior living, you don't just have one customer, you have 2, maybe 20, depending on how the family is. And so that's just, a latent, nascent market that's yet to be really developed. I won't share this video, but when you have a chance, look at it when you have a chance. Okay, so I think I'll just end, and only to say I don't have time to talk about COVID, but I did a lot of writing about how COVID impacted every shift in our book. So in total, there's 20 shifts. I gave them a red, yellow, green. Those are all written up in these blogs. You can read them, 1 per chapter, with some really neat examples of things that have happened around the world with innovation and pivots around aging given COVID, and then a bit of an appraisal of, did it accelerate the shifts, keep them neutral, or actually did we go backwards? And, at a very high level, this is kind of my in-scientific appraisal that I think a couple of the chapters we regressed around ageism, around income security. I think tech accelerated significantly, healthcare a little bit, and I think housing, not really. So I kept that neutral. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about. So let's wrap up and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Zayna. I think we've covered the topics. We have a few more questions, but I think we've covered those topics either in your presentation or in the questions that we asked before. So I get to say thank you. That was incredibly interesting, really noticeably different and meaningful. I, for one, am planning to take this book to my dinner table because I think it's meaningful for all generations. I'm going to share it with my kids. I'm sure they'll have something to say. But we have a real thank you in store, and it is a special video presentation that was done by Paul Alexa Jansen from Yardi, who again was our SenbridGe Satellite Holiday Edition sponsor. So over to Paul.
Well, I wanted to thank Dr. Khayat for her insight in the future of aging and where we go from here. As well, I wanted to thank SenbridGe for allowing Yardi to continue to sponsor this event and others like it. And if you don't know who Yardi is, we do software for the retirement industry that right from the first digital touch through them becoming a resident, through taking care of the resident, family and resident portals, and every step in between.
Thank you, Paul. So we are at the conclusion of our holiday edition. And just to take it to a little bit more of a personal note here, this morning at Goodman's, we had our first ever virtual holiday sing-song. And because I genuinely hope that I will never have to do another virtual holiday sing-song, and because some of you have asked me to do this, and because I see lots of people have dropped off now, I would like to share with you my gift to you. It is a rendition of a little known holiday song called The 8 Days of Hanukkah, the COVID edition. On the 8th day of Hanukkah, my true love gave to me many friends to Zoom with, 7 loaves of sourdough, 6 feet of distance, 5 iron rings, 4 sanitizers, 3 toilet papers, 2 shares of Pfizer, and a mask to keep us virus free. Happy holidays, everybody. See you in 2021.